Okay. So good morning for folks who are joining. We're going to allow a couple minutes for everyone to log into the session. So we'll get started momentarily. So again, for folks joining us this morning, hello and welcome to completing the FAFSA CADAA session. We are waiting as patiently as folks log into the session. We know that usually takes a moment, but we are planning on getting started promptly at 10:30 since we have a lot of information to cover. So give us a minute and we'll get started shortly. Okay, so we want to make sure to honor people's time and get started promptly at 10:30 because there is a lot of information to cover this morning. So again, for all of you joining us, thank you and welcome to completing the FAFSA CADAA, a how-to for adult supporters of foster youth. We know that more people are joining as the session progresses, and so we will have a chance for folks to continue with the information and knowing, of course, the information is being recorded and will be posted on the JBay website. At this point, all attendees are muted to help make sure we have enough time to work through all of the information in this presentation. And you can connect if you're on the move or in listening mode, you can connect to audio via your computer or your phone. You also have access to closed captioning this morning, and so you can turn it on or disable it as you choose. And questions will be submitted via the Q&A. We strongly encourage folks to use the Q&A session or section to submit all of their questions so we can make sure to track those and also be able to provide those along with other handouts and materials that will be provided to everyone who registered for this session. So this morning, we're joined by some lovely presenters. We have here with us today, Jessica Petros, Associate Director of Education with John Burden Advocates for Youth. We have Christina, who is one of our John Burden advocates and who will be sharing some of her experience with the FAFSA completion process. We also have some experts online and available, including Anna Faye Robinson, who is a director of financial aid and scholarship at Los Angeles Pierce College, who will be fielding a lot of those questions in that Q&A. And we also are joined by Debbie Rauscher, Director of Education at John Burden Advocates for Youth, who will also be providing her expertise. So thank you to both of you for being here and providing your expert insights. On our agenda this morning, we will be covering a couple of different topics, including why financial aid matters, how to apply for financial aid after the FAFSA and CADAA, what steps to look forward to, and also additional helpful resources. Now, please, reminder, I know several people will ask or maybe are asking already, yes, all of this material will be provided to all folks who registered, including a link to the recording, all of the PowerPoint slides, and any additional resources and materials, including a link to the financial aid guide. So we're off to the races. Starting with why financial aid matters. So when it comes to looking at financial aid, we really want to acknowledge that it does have an impact in how students have the likelihood of students both enrolling and completing post-secondary education. And so in one instance, we see that students who completed their FAFSA are 63% more likely to enroll in higher education. We also know that students who receive at least $7,500 in financial aid were 49% more likely to transfer or graduate. And in looking at students who received only $1,000 to $2,000, who were 17% transferred or graduated. So the difference between those two and the amount of financial aid received by a student can significantly impact their chances of transferring or graduating. Likewise, when we know the impact that CHAFE can make on a student, so for students who were in extended foster care, we know the estimated odds of completing a degree were almost 2.4% times higher for youth who received a CHAFE grant than for those who did not. So that financial aid can make a real difference in students' not only confidence, ability to complete their program and pay for all the essentials that they need for their post-secondary education. So that is why we're really encouraging folks to join the FAFSA challenge and to really look at promoting the outcomes for the FAFSA challenge in the coming years. We have seen an upward rise. In fact, in the past 3 years, despite COVID, we've seen students completing at higher rates than their peers in the general population. And we're seeing a strong recovery from our 2020-2021 numbers of 55% completion rate to this year's or 62% completion rate. So we are excited for our 70% completion rate for 22-23. And we strongly encourage folks who are working with high school seniors to reach out to their County Office of Education Foster Youth Services. These FYSCP programs can provide technical assistance, they can provide training, and they can also provide data on completion for high school seniors of the FAFSA. So definitely reaching out to your FYSCP program on the link provided. And again, folks will be receiving the slides for the presentation. So all these links are live through that PDF. So general tips for completing or assisting youth for completing the FAFSA and CADAA. We know that AB 469 requires LEAs to provide support and resources for students to complete this process. However, we know that sending a list of resources maybe via email may not be enough, or it's definitely not enough. And so we constantly encourage high touch intrusive services when it comes to completing this process. We know that ideally it would be able to meet with the student individually one-on-one to help provide that support and targeted support to students' questions that they may have about the FAFSA, but also about the college going process, depending on how much information they've been able to acquire. And it's possible that they may be first generation student, or that they may not have access to individuals who can answer these questions for them. So this would be a great opportunity to have those types of conversations and to build a safe space for students to be open about their thoughts and concerns. We want to also make sure we start this process early so students have enough time to gather materials and to schedule time, possibly multiple sessions with folks to complete the process and really reduce the stress. And we know with our experience over the past several years that assistance can be rendered virtual or in person to really accommodate the needs of the student and to reduce barriers to that access. When it comes to, again, really providing an opportunity to talk to students about their future and their potential, so taking the time to complete the FAFSA, but also, again, to encourage and motivate students and letting them know that they can complete their post-secondary degree goals. And again, being able to work through if they're feeling overwhelmed or nervous, or maybe they may not be completely confident in their ability to transition into college. So really giving it time to encourage them to affirm and really look at their strengths, so that students know that they can make that transition successfully. We know that students who are encouraged and receive a lot of encouragement are far more likely to not only enroll, but also complete their post-secondary education compared to students who did not receive that kind of support. So again, taking this time is really essential, not only for the technical support, but also to answer those questions and creating that safe space. So to tell us a little bit more about their experience with the completion process, we have Christina Torres, who's going to share a little bit more, and I'll pass it over to Jessica and Christina.
Great, thank you so much, Linda. So I'm really excited to introduce our youth advocate, Chris Torres. She's a current student at Bakersfield College. She's studying political science with a minor in sociology and is also a parent to 3 children. So Chris, if you can start us off by just letting us know a little bit about what your experience was in applying for financial aid.
Yes, thank you. So my experience with applying, well, before I start, a little bit of background is I graduated high school while being in a group home. I was also a teen parent as well. When it came to me, right after I had graduated, I had gotten into this, our ILP workers and our social workers set up like a workshop to be able to fill out the FAFSA. And they were able to help me fill out the questions and stuff. So when I first saw the application, to me, it was confusing and intimidating because there was questions that I didn't really understand and I didn't know how to answer. Like, for example, when it came to my biological parents, and because I know there's certain questions that asked certain things like if you know how much they made or the taxes or certain things, and I didn't know because I didn't really know my biological parents. So that was very intimidating to me. But my social worker and also my IOP worker was the one to be able to tell me it's okay if you don't know that information, you can just bypass it. Just put I don't know or just skip it in general. It was helpful that they were there to help me because when it came to asking questions, they were willing to answer the questions for me.
Great. And today's training is definitely going to make sure that all of our adult supporters here today know how to assist students in answering all those questions accurately, since they can be, as you mentioned, very confusing for a lot of students in the foster care system. Luckily, you were able to fill out the application with the support that you received. Can you tell us a little bit about how that financial aid was helpful in your educational journey?
Yes. So by filling out the FAFSA, I was able to receive financial aid. And that was able to help me get my laptop, my textbooks, my school supplies. And after I had gotten all my stuff for school, I was able to get things for my daughters like diapers and clothes. I didn't get the Chafee grant the first year, but as I went to school the following year, I was able to get the Chafee grant, and that was actually even more helpful as well.
Great. So in today's training, we're going to be covering how folks can assist students in applying for financial aid, but we know that filling out those applications is really just the first step. Students also have to meet what's called satisfactory academic progress, known as SAP, so that they can maintain their financial aid once they receive it by, passing enough classes along the way. And we're going to talk more about what that all means in the training today, but if you can talk about what your experience has been with SAP, or satisfactory academic progress, and what advice that you have for adult supporters to make sure that youth are really supported to successfully pass their classes once they're in college.
Yes, so SAP is where I was on satisfactory academic. I was on SAP for, I'm technically still on SAP. But I was on SAP because of COVID. I didn't really get good enough grades because of COVID had hit, and at the same time my kids were in school, but then they fell out of school, so it was a little bit difficult trying to do classes and also take care of my kids. So my grades kind of like fell through, but luckily I'm working on that now. I think that it's important for our youth to be educated on what SAP is, and that you guys talk to them about the importance of passing. their classes in order to get their financial aid. I've always struggled with school. It's been like that since I was young. I wasn't able to ask for help when I needed it because I was embarrassed, and a lot of our youth are embarrassed to ask for help. For me, it's a pride thing. For other youth, it could be as well. For like, an example is for the first time when I had asked for help, it was with my social worker, and what she told me is, "You're an adult and you should do it yourself." This this kind of closed me off from asking for help, and it was very difficult to ask for help after that. After I got the support by completing the FAFSA, the support kind of like fell out as it ended. I wasn't immediately connected with consistent support to help me beyond that. So it was very difficult to try and get the help that I needed. It wasn't until I trusted someone again that I felt safe and was able to ask for help. And I was eventually connected to the Next Step program. And I think that's another program that you supporters should be able to let our youth know that that program is there. And the Next Step program is not just yet in all college campuses, but it should. Another advice that I have is also asking your youth certain questions if they need help with certain things, if they need support. The questions that I wish that I was asked is, how can I help you help yourself? What support do you need, and how can I help you with that support? Is there any resources that you are in need of? I think to get youth connected to consistent support through campus-based foster youth support programs like the Next Step. There are similar programs at CSUs and UCs as well. I think it's important that there isn't a gap for them in support as they transition into college, because I know it's a difficult, when you transition from childhood to adulthood, that transition can be difficult. And I think that there should be more support for our foster youth when they're filling out these applications, but also trying to get into certain supports at the colleges. Sorry. And I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much. I think those are some really good tips for the folks joining us today. And if anyone has any questions for Chris, you can submit them in the Q&A. She'll be joining us for the rest of the webinar. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Linda.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you so much, Christina, for the honesty, the openness, and the willingness to share some of those insights with us and our audience today. So moving then now into how to apply for financial aid. And so we're really looking at breaking down this process into 3 core steps. So it's not necessarily just about the FAFSA and the CADAA, but also looking at making sure students take that time and opportunity to complete the CHAFE application and create a web grants account. Now we've listed projected times, that folks can maybe budget to help allocate for to assist students with completing these. And so you'll see some time allocations below, though just note that each student is different and could take a little bit longer or less time depending on their needs. So where can students go to apply for financial aid? So we're looking at 2 primary applications this morning, the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, which if you're a US citizen, a permanent resident, or other eligible non-citizen, saying that you have a green card or permanent resident card, you would be eligible to complete the FAFSA. The CADAA, the California Dream Act, is available for students who are eligible undocumented immigrants, and we'll be talking a little bit more about eligibility for the CADAA. So with the FAFSA application, it is available in English or Spanish at fafsa.gov. We do want to let folks know that the mobile app is no longer available, and so students will need to go online to complete the application. Students can access a paper application or download the PDF version of the application on the FAFSA website. However, we do encourage students to complete the application online to reduce the risk for potential errors. Now, for the CADAA completion, the online application is available in English only. and it's available at the website listed above. Again, for those of you who might have just joined us, all of the information provided today will be sent to folks who registered, including a link to the recording, as well as all of the slides provided here and additional resources. So for those who are completing the CADAA application, you folks will find the English version of the application on the website. Again, a Spanish version is available via PDF version and can be downloaded. As much as possible, we encourage, again, online access for the applications to make it easier for students to complete and to reduce errors. So again, what the CADAA provides for students, for eligible students, is access to state financial aid. And that not only provides access for in-state resident fees, which are significantly more affordable than non-resident fees and tuition, but it also provides access to the Cal Grant and Chafee grants, local state grants. Unfortunately, it does not provide access for federal financial aid. So students would not be eligible to receive federal aid like the Pell Grant or federal work study. So looking at who is eligible to submit the CADAA, we are looking at the AB 540 criteria. Students who may have temporary protected status or hold a U visa. And so temporary protected status can be designated by the Secretary of Homeland Security for countries that are experiencing temporary disruptions, such as ongoing warfare or warfare or environmental disasters, or like earthquakes, floods, and so forth, as well as other extraordinary circumstances. And for U visa, these visas are available for students who may have experienced or been victims of crime and have experienced physical or mental abuse, and who may also be working with law enforcement to prosecute criminal activity. So when it comes to AB 540 students, or students who may qualify under AB 540, we want to make sure that students satisfy all of the following criteria, including having attended schools, again, for a minimum period of time, having earned a high school diploma or equivalent from a California school, or a degree from a California community college. They must be planning to enroll in an accredited college in California, and they cannot, again, have hold a non-immigrant visa. These criteria will appear on the application for students and will be screened for screening purposes. Now, when it comes to students with DACA status, or they can and should complete the California DREAM Act. However, a student does not have to have DACA status to be able to apply to the DREAM Act. So if a student never applied for DACA or lost their DACA status, they can or may still be eligible to complete the CADAA. Students who received a Social Security number or have a Social Security card that provides access for employment only must still complete the CADAA. So they are not yet eligible to complete the FAFSA. And we really want to emphasize that CADAA information is private, that it is CSAC, or the California Student Aid Commission, complies with FERPA policies and holds information confidential and private for student records, and that also it does not share any records with any federal agencies, including immigration. When we're looking at special immigration juvenile status, or otherwise known as SIJS, foster youth who are undocumented immigrants can qualify to receive SIJS. And this is primarily for students who are dependents of a juvenile court and who may not be able to be reunified with parents based off of various criteria, possibly experiencing abuse, abandonment, or neglect, and or may not be safe to return that student to their country of nationality. So it's something that they may be able to apply and qualify for. A student with a pending application for SIJS may not be eligible for FAFSA at this point until they have received permanent legal residency or their green card. So at this point, they should still complete the CADAA. If you're working with an undocumented student who is in the child welfare system and you're not sure if they have a pending, or if they're not sure that they have a pending SIJS application, you can contact the child welfare agency for having the student screened and to see if that's the best option for the student. It's something that if they are eligible, the application we would want to get that started before the student turns 18 years of age. So looking at how need is defined, primarily the questions that are being asked on the FAFSA and CADAA are to determine the expected family contribution, or that circle in the middle, which is really the amount that a student can contribute towards their cost of their education. And in many cases for our foster youth, that is going to be zero. So many students who are granted financial independence see that their EFC is zero. That amount would be subtracted from the overall cost of attendance, which is calculated by looking at the institution's tuition, fees, room and board, cost of transportation, books, and other costs associated with the attendance at that school or completion of that degree program. So in subtracting the expected family contribution from cost of attendance, that's how we will arrive at the eligibility for need. And again, students, that will make them available or able to access the different types of aid, like the Pell Grant, the Cal Grant, and the CHAFE. So really looking at when it is best to apply. And we know that the priority application period, again, runs between October 1st and March 2nd. And so for students who are planning to apply to a four-year institution, it's really essential that they complete that process before the March 2nd priority deadline. For students who are planning on attending community college, they do have until September 2nd for a priority deadline. But again, students who are attending institutions, post-secondary institutions, should apply no matter what. So if they've missed that priority deadline, please make sure they continue to apply to access as much funding as possible. Now, some colleges may have earlier priority deadlines, and so it's best to check to make sure what your institution deadline is. But please be aware that there is no order of operations. You can go ahead and submit your FAFSA prior to completing any college applications, so long as you have a sense of where students may be interested in applying to, and they can change those college selections or update them as time goes on. So important things to bring with you when you are preparing to complete the FAFSA. We want students to definitely have an email address that is easily accessible and that they can check often. And for this reason, we really encourage students to use a more broad or global address, such as a Gmail, a Yahoo, an Outlook, because many times district email may expire after a student graduates. And so really making sure that they have long-term access to that email address. Hopefully up to 10 colleges that student may plan to apply. Sometimes students will want to list one or two, and it's really an opportunity if they think they might be interested in applying to that college, it's best to list it so that all the colleges of interest can receive that information. For a social security number and alien registration number, that's required on the FAFSA only. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. And if students don't have access to that documentation, again, reaching out to child welfare representatives or ILP to be able to access that information. For the statewide student identifier or the individual taxpayer identification number or ITIN, that is only requested on the CADAA, and it is optional. So again, students do not necessarily have to have it, but it is an option to report. And for students who, for tax income, so this is requested for the prior year. So again, if students are applying for this year, they will be reporting income for the 2020 year. And so many students who work during high school may or may not have earned enough money to file their taxes, but they will still want to have their W-2s provided by their employer or a 1099 if that's the document they received, to be able to report accurate income for their FAFSA. If a student used their ITIN and is filling out the CADAA and they did file their taxes, we want to just be advised that the student may also be asked to provide information about their assets, which could include savings accounts or checking accounts. Now, changes from FAFSA that we see apply for this round of the FAFSA application is you'll find that the selective service registration is no longer required. We'll also see that gender is removed from the CADAA altogether, so that is no longer a question on the CADAA. On the FAFSA, the gender question is now asked at the end in a new optional demographic section. And that also includes a non-binary as an option. So looking to make sure, again, that with certain information, especially personal information or identifying information, that students feel comfortable and safe in disclosing information. And so, again, trying to create that space as you're working with the student who complete the FAFSA to help build that trust and comfort. The final change is looking at the restrictions related to having a prior drug-related conviction that no longer applies. So that has also been removed from the FAFSA. So now let's get started. So we're looking at the very first step, starting here. So if you are a new applicant, when you arrive at the FAFSA.gov website, you'll see two options to start here. Or if you're a brand new student, or if you're a returning student, you can use the login function, and that will require you to have your login information from before, but it will also allow to import some information from your previous application. So it is important to check to make sure that all of that is still accurate, and we'll move on to that. When identifying for the FAFSA application, 99.9% of the time, you'll be selecting I am the student and want to access the FAFSA form. For adults who are supporting youth, unless you would not necessarily select the I am a preparer, that is a different category kind of support, and usually does not qualify if you're assisting the student in this instance as a counselor, teacher, or child welfare professional, for example. They would still select the I am a student option and move forward. So in this instance, students will have, again, the option to log in to continue if they're returning, or again, create an FSA ID. The FSA ID, again, provides an opportunity for students to use the digital signature at the very end, which can help expedite the submission process. So we do encourage that at the very beginning, just to move that forward. Students can move forward with the personal identifier information, and so that is an option as well. But if you do select the FSA ID number, then or option, then you will be temporarily exiting the FAFSA application to complete the FSA ID, but will be able to log back in once that is available. So if you're logging in again, using your username, email, or mobile phone information, that depending on what you've provided, and your password. Now, some cases students may forget that information, so there is an option to indicate that I forgot my username or forgot my password, and allow students to reset that. And again, this is why we want to start this process early, to make sure students have ample opportunity to discover this or to move through this process as needed. And so here, if we're starting a new account or a new FAFSA for new students only, then we can go to creating an account for an FSA ID. So how do we do that? Let's look. When it comes to creating the FSA ID, we know that we're going to need some core pieces of information, including the social security number, and then again, a mobile phone number or email address, or preferably both. So we can select the Get Started option, and that will lead us to filling in our name and social security information. This is where we strongly encourage students to have their social security card in front of them so that they can provide the information exactly as it is indicated on their social security card. That includes certain spelling of names that maybe have changed over time or were misspelled originally on the application for the social security card, as well as any hyphens that may be in the name. But we just want to make sure that all of that is exactly as it appears on the social security card to reduce the possibility for future problems or errors. When it comes to creating the FSA ID account, students will need to create a username and password. And this is where, again, it's encouraged for students to maybe create a consistent username password for their education-related accounts, something that they, again, can easily remember. In this instance, for the email accounts, if students are using a particular email, again, a global email would be recommended, and making sure that they're checking their spam or junk mailboxes just to ensure that they're accessing all that information and nothing's getting through or slipping through. When looking at contact information, the mailing address is optional, but students must provide an email address or phone number. And again, this is going to be very essential with communication and also being able to recover or access if students get their FAFSA account if they get locked out. So here a student can provide a mobile phone number, and they can also indicate at the bottom of the page that they would like to use their mobile phone number for account recovery, which we strongly encourage folks to do. So when it comes to ongoing communication, again, email or phone or postal mail is the option. We strongly encourage that students use email. Obviously, it's more expedited, faster, and again, easily accessible from various devices. And so we want to make sure students have timely access to their information. For other informational communication, students can select email or text. My experience, students may have disconnected phone numbers, loss of access to a phone, or just have lost it altogether. So email sometimes becomes the most consistent, and also being able to indicate the preferred language at the bottom of the page. Now, students will have to create or select and create challenge questions and answers. In this instance, students might be encouraged to select some question where the answer does not change over time. So your favorite movie could change over time, but maybe a maiden name or someone's name in the family may not. So encouraging students to really think around which questions they're going to be easily able to remember. And students can also take a picture once this section is completed to archive that information and have access to it if needed. They'll have a chance to confirm all of this information and verify that it's accurate. So students will be able to edit anything that they find or mistakes before submitting. And in this instance, there is again a two-step verification. So this is a new process, and looking to make sure that students have either access through their phone or email, or they can verify both and receive a secure code to verify that their email or mobile number, so that they can use either for that two-step verification process. Again, these must be verified in order to be eligible to be used. So as we're looking, we received a lot of information right now, but really making sure students have access to this information over the long term. It is seasonal, you can say, so students may not have to use it on a repeated basis, and it's very likely that students can forget their login information and other related login. So please make sure that students have record their FSA ID username, their FSA ID password, their email address, which email address they use. We know students have several, and the related password, as well as their FSA ID challenge questions and answers. So just making sure students have access to this information and they can reference it in the future should they need to log back into their account. So students who complete the CADAA, while there is no FSA ID, but students do have to create a user account and a username and password, as well as challenge questions. So it will be important to document, or for them to hold on to a place to refer for this information in the future. And then also students will be asked to, again, questions to confirm their eligibility moving forward on the CADAA application itself. So those AB 540 eligibility questions, those will be used for screening. So you will see that. Moving on now, I'll pass it over to Jessica to lead us into now we're filling out the FAFSA.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. So before we dive into all the different questions on the FAFSA, I just wanted to note that right now, if students log into the FAFSA application, there's actually a pop-up right now that if students want to apply for student loan forgiveness. So it might be a little confusing for students. That pop-up will come, and if they click start, they'll actually be starting an application for student loan forgiveness. So they would want to make sure to dismiss that so they can get to the general login page for the FAFSA. And as we go through the screenshots, I just want to note these are screenshots as if someone was filling out the application on their computer, but the FAFSA application is also mobile friendly, so they can fill it out on their phone, but they did get rid of the mobile app. So students can either fill it out though still on their phone through their browser or on their computer. All right, so now let's get started. Once the student has their FSA ID created, they go back to the main page and log in with their information, and then they can get started. Next page. There'll be a disclaimer page that comes up that they can just simply read and click accept and to move on to the next question. And then they have to select the school year in which they're applying for financial aid. And this is actually a section where we see that a lot of students get confused. It's not asking about the current academic year, it's asking about the school year that they'll plan on attending college. So right now, if you have students filling out the application and they're thinking about going to school in 2023, 24, that's the application that they're going to be selecting. Now, summer can be a little confusing. Every school handles summer financial aid differently. Some process it as part of the prior year, some process it as part of the upcoming school year. So if you have a student that's thinking about applying for financial aid for summer, we recommend that they actually fill out both applications. And then once they've selected their college, know where they're going to be attending, they should check with the financial aid office about summer financial aid and how that college processes it. Next slide. Next, they have to create yet another thing to remember, a save key. The save key, it's just on the FAFSA, it's not on the California DREAM Act application, but this is for students who don't fill the application all at once. They can stop it and save it and finish it later, and they can actually return up to 45 days later to complete the application. Next slide. So in addition to all the other items that Linda mentioned that students should create a system to store safely so that they don't forget, you also want to encourage them to add that save key to the list of things to write down so they can remember and access it later if they need to. Once they create their save key, there's just a general introduction page that gives them an overview about the application, and then they can just click continue. And then they start the questions. So as you can see on the top, there are 7 sections. Some of those sections are called parent demographics and parent financials. And we'll talk about how eligible foster youth can respond to questions appropriately in the application so that they will actually be able to skip those sections. Also to note, there's a lot of built-in functionality to assist students while they're filling out the application. If they have questions, there's a little question mark icon. And there's also a cute little green owl in the corner that can assist students virtually for live questions in the moment. Next slide. So we'll start off with the first section, which is on student demographics. As you'll see, the Social Security number will pre-fill from what they put into their FSA ID. So once again, we'll want to make sure that they entered that information correctly when they filled out their FSA ID account. And then they will have to still provide their name, which once again needs to make sure that it matches their name exactly as it appears on their Social Security card. They simply then add their date of birth, and then they can go to the next slide. Here they provide an email address and telephone number. The email address, definitely make sure they enter that correctly because a lot of information that's important can be sent to them via email. Also recommend that students check their spam folder. Sometimes critical information gets sent to that spam or junk folder. It's not mandatory to enter an email address, but we definitely recommend it. Similarly with the phone number, it's not required, it is optional. Next slide. Here's where the student will provide their address. This is a permanent mailing address. It should be the same address that they use on any official government documents, like their tax returns. It's where the student will receive their mail, and it can be a PO box as well. Now, if you're working with a student who doesn't have a permanent mailing address, be sure to work with them to think of a plan, and they can always reach out to their college's financial aid administrators for assistance as well. Next slide. This is the student residency and eligibility section. So the first question is going to ask, have you lived in California for at least 5 years? This is really screening for eligibility for California's state financial aid. The most common one is called the Cal Grant. Now, it's important to note that there's not a separate application for students to apply for state financial aid. By filling out the FAFSA, it's one application to determine eligibility for both state and federal financial aid. However, as we'll talk about as we go through the training, there is a minimum GPA requirement to receive the Cal Grant of 2.0, with the exception of students attending career and technical education programs. And so there are some critical steps students should take to make sure that their GPA is submitted and processed, and we'll make sure you all know how to do that as well. And then the next question is asking if they're a US citizen. They can either say they are a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen. If they select the option that says they are not a citizen or eligible non-citizen, those students should be directed to fill out the California DREAM Act application to determine their eligibility. Next slide. So student education, the first question is asking about their high school completion status when they start college. They can select high school diploma. They can also select GED, and that's okay as well. But the next question is one that we actually see a lot of students answering correctly. It's asking about their college degree or certificate that they're going to be working on when they start college. Now, it's asking about their initial educational goal, not their long-term goal. So let's say you have a student that's planning on enrolling in community college. Perhaps their ultimate goal is to receive their bachelor's degree. They should not select bachelor's degree if they're starting at community college. They would, in that case, select one of the associate degree options. Now, let's say you're working with a student who's not sure what they want to do. They're not sure where they're going to attend. We definitely recommend they do not select other or undecided, because it can reduce the amount of aid that they are offered. If they're unsure, select first bachelor's degree for now, and if it turns out that their plans change, they're not going to be attending a 4-year college or university, and they attend a community college, they can go back in and update their response. It is really important, though, that they do update it correctly, because an error message can come up and it can delay the administration of their aid to the student. Additionally, they should not select second bachelor's degree unless they already have received their first bachelor's degree. Next slide. The next question is asking what their college grade level will be when they start the 2023-24 school year. Now, for some students, you might be working with some high school students who actually took a dual enrollment or concurrent enrollment classes while they were in high school. They were essentially taking college level courses while they were in high school. Even if they took college level courses through dual enrollment while they were in high school, they're still considered a first-time college student. So they would still select never attended college first year. And then the next question is asking if they're interested in being considered for work study. In my experience, most students are not going to be aware of what work study is. So make sure to educate them about that so they're aware that, this is federal financial aid that a student can get, where they can earn a portion of their financial aid by a part-time employment opportunity, either on or off campus. Now, if they select yes, that doesn't mean that they'll automatically get it. If they do get awarded financial aid through work study and they decide actually they don't want to do it, that's okay. They can always decline it later if they change their mind. By selecting yes, it at least creates the opportunity for them if they choose to pursue it later on and are offered it. The next slide is here about driver's license. Again, this isn't required, but if they have one, they can put it in. It's really just a question to help prevent identity theft and their driving record, or if they had any parking tickets. It's not going to affect their eligibility for financial aid. Next slide. This is the student foster care and parent education completion section. And there's a question here that says, are you a foster youth or were you in the foster care system at any time? Even if a student was in the foster care system for at least one day, we do advise that they select yes. It doesn't automatically enroll them in any types of programs or resources, but a lot of our campus-based foster youth support programs will get their roster of students that select yes to this question and proactively reach out to students to inform them about their program. So it might just create some additional opportunities to get connected to supports. That question, though, it's not on the CADAA. And then this next question, this is one that Chris was mentioning earlier that can be really triggering for a lot of students involved in the foster care system. Is it asks, what is the highest school level completed by the student's parents? And please let students know that this question is optional. They do not have to report that information if they don't want to, or if they don't know. They can simply just select other or unknown, and it won't impact their eligibility for aid in any way. All right, now we're moving along to section 2, which is the school selection section. If on the prior question they indicated that they will be receiving their high school diploma, they're going to be asked to add the information about the high school that they will be graduating from. Now, if they selected that they will receive or did receive a GED or equivalent, this question will not pop up. But we see a lot of times there's a lot of errors because students will manually type in their high school name, and sometimes they spell it wrong or something of that nature. So please encourage students to try and find their high school using the search function. Next slide. This is just an example. If they use the search function, there might be a list of high schools with similar names that pop up. They should carefully review it, select their high school, and click continue. And then just confirm that that information that they selected is correct and click continue. Now, I will say there might be some scenarios where someone's high school is not in the system, and in that case, the student would manually enter the school's name, but otherwise, we do encourage them to use the search function. So now they enter which colleges they're interested or planning on applying to. Now, they can actually add up to 10 colleges at a time. And as was mentioned earlier, they can update or change this information later. So if they're not quite sure yet, that's okay. At minimum, they do have to enter at least one college. And it's okay yet if they haven't even applied or they haven't been admitted. So they can get this application going ahead of time. So you put in the information in the search function, click search, and then go to the next slide. And similarly, they'll get a list of potential schools, select the one that they're interested in. And for students that might be interested in applying to a UC or CSU, they do need to list each UC or each CSU that they are interested in applying to. Next slide. So let's say you have a student that wants to list more than 10 colleges. That's okay too. So what they could do is after their FAFSA or their CADAA gets processed, they'll receive something called a student aid report or a STAR. And then they can go back into their applications. They can delete the original 10 that they listed, and they can replace it with a new set of 10 colleges. And they can do this as many times as they'd like. And all the colleges that they originally listed will still receive their information. Next slide. So once they select their colleges, they'll indicate their housing plans for each college that they have listed. So there's a few things to keep in mind. Some of your students might be, after they graduate high school as a young adult, might be living with their parent or might be living with a resource parent. We advise that they do not select with parent as their housing plan option if they are living with a foster parent or relative caregiver or even a legal guardian. In that case, we recommend that they select off campus and this will be crucial for maximizing their financial aid. But just to be clear, the options are either selecting on campus if they're going to be at a school that offers on-campus housing, with parent, or off campus. The order that they list their colleges doesn't matter in California as well. All right, next slide. All right, so dependency status, this, in my opinion, is the most critical section on the application. This section determines if a student is independent for the purposes of the FAFSA, or the California DREAM Act application. If a student is determined to be independent, they do not need to provide information about their parents. In that case, they'll only be reporting on their student's income only, or spouse if they happen to be married. Now, there's many different ways that a student can be determined to be independent on the FAFSA, and one of them is based on their age. So if they're 24 or older, they'll automatically be determined independent, and the next questions that I'll be showing you won't appear because they'll automatically have been granted the independent status. Next slide. So there's many ways in addition to age that someone might be independent. For example, if the student is married, they'll be considered independent. That doesn't mean their boyfriend or girlfriend, but if their legal status is married. Next slide. They could also become independent if they have dependents. So if they have children, they would answer those questions and be considered independent on the FAFSA. And then if so, then they would automatically skip the next questions that we will be reviewing. Next slide. Now, if they did indicate that they have children, or if they're married, it's going to auto-calculate their household size. And this is just talking about household size based off of spouse or children. It's not looking at siblings or other relatives or foster families. It will ask them, though, the number of people in their household that are attending college. So in that case, they would only enter 1 for the number in college, unless they have a spouse who will be also attending college at least half-time. Next slide. So if they are under the age of 21, they're not married, and they don't have children, then they will be asked additional questions to determine their dependency status. And there's, 2 very important questions that we have here highlighted in red that are related to someone's involvement in the foster care system. And if they can answer yes to any of these questions, then they are considered independent. So the first one says, at any time since you turned age 13, were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a dependent or ward of the court? The other option could be someone in legal guardianship. So it says, does someone other than your parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of you as determined by a court in your state of legal residence? So before we go to the next slide, I just want to spend a little time explaining these two, because I think a lot of folks might get confused with these questions. So just to clarify, when it's talking about involvement in the foster care system after the age of 13, if someone was involved in out-of-home care for at least 1 day after the age of 13, they can check off that box. So if they get reunified with their parents, let's say at age 13 and a half, that's okay. They can still check off the box. Or if they get adopted after the age of 13, they can still check off the box. There will be court-ordered documents that exist to designate the youth as a ward of the court. But if the student remained, they were involved in the foster care system, but they remained in the legal custody of their parents, they unfortunately will not qualify for independent status. So that can be confusing. Someone might be involved in the child welfare system. They might have a social worker. Perhaps they were in what's called family maintenance, still living with their parent or parents. They would not qualify unless they were removed from the home in out-of-home care for at least 1 day after the age of 13. Now, some of our foster youth are also under the jurisdiction of the Juvenile Justice Probation Department. And just to clarify, they are also still eligible for financial aid if they can answer yes to either of those questions. And we will talk about, there are some special circumstances that might apply to some students, but I'll get to that in just a few slides. Next slide. So if a student does check off the box that they were in the foster care system at least 1 day after the age of 13, Ideally, there's nothing more that that student should have to do. There's a new function built into the web grant system that the colleges use that automatically verifies their foster care status through a data match with the California Department of Social Services. So colleges should now simply go into that system, check a box, and they'll be able to get a verification of their foster care status. However, what we're hearing anecdotally is that although this functionality exists, not all colleges are using it. So it is possible that your student might still get flagged and asked to provide what's called a dependency letter or ward of the court letter to verify that they were in the foster care system. If they do need to provide that letter, or perhaps there was an error in the system with matching their information, we do have information on the slide about how they can get that letter if needed. Next slide. Now, if a student went through all of those prior questions and actually selected none of the above, there are additional questions that would come up. Someone can also gain independent status if they meet the definition of homelessness per the FAFSA. We won't be going over that information on this training. We do have additional resources and a recorded webinar listed on the slide if anyone needs any information on how to get independent status based on their experience with homelessness. I know some of you may be working with students who are both foster youth and also experiencing homelessness. In that scenario, I highly recommend that they respond to the question that asks about their foster care status. It's a lot easier to get verification based off of their foster care status than to go through the process of verification for students who meet the definition of homelessness. Next slide. Now, if they are determined to be independent, then this slide will come up and it'll ask, okay, you're independent, but would you like to answer questions about your parents? And it's definitely okay if students select no. They can still continue to skip questions about their parents. It's not going to impact their eligibility for aid. Next slide. Now, this is the special circumstances slide I was talking about. Let's say you're working with a student that does not meet the criteria that we went over to gain independent status. There are some special circumstances where a student could still advocate to be able to get independent status. And so it says here, if you have a special circumstance, you're unable to provide parental information, they can select that box that says, I'm unable to provide information about my parents. Next slide. It'll let them know, though, that if you don't provide your information about your parents, that your application essentially isn't going to be fully processed. It's not going to confirm your expected family contribution, and you'll have to follow up with the financial aid office as a next step. Next slide. And then it gives even further information that there's only certain circumstances in which someone could have meet the criteria for special circumstances qualifications. So for example, let's say they're just not living with their parents, or their parents just aren't providing for them, or their parents just don't want to provide the information on the application. Those things don't count. But circumstances that may qualify for this type of exception would be someone who is in an abusive family, there's parental incarceration, or if the parents' whereabouts are unknown. So it gives you that information, and then you can confirm that you have a special circumstance and select continue. So the questions on the California DREAM Act application are very similar. The only main difference is on the CADAA only. There's also a question that asks about their eligibility for the Chafee grant. And we'll talk more about what that Chafee grant is, but just to flag that this is a supplemental question on the California DREAM Act application. All right, so the next section we have here is on student financials, the fun stuff. So this is where it asks about the students' income and tax information from the prior year. So as we talked about, students who are planning on attending in 23-24, they're going to be asked about information from tax or income information from 2021. Any questions about assets will be filled out based on the date in which they're filling out the FAFSA. So there will be 3 options when they fill out the application, when they get to this section. It's going to ask about their tax filing status, and it's going to say either already completed, will file, or not going to file. So we're going to walk through those 3 options depending on your student and what their tax filing status may be. So we'll start off with the first option, which is already completed. So the next slide. So they would select that, and then they would say which income tax return they filed. And then there's actually an option to pull their information from their taxes automatically through what's called the IRS data retrieval tool. Students can enter the information from their taxes manually into the FAFSA, but that can lead to a lot of errors. So we definitely recommend that if they did file taxes, to use the data retrieval tool to auto-populate the information into their application. Now, if they don't have a copy of their tax returns, we do have information in our guides that gives instructions on how they can get a copy if they need it. Next slide. So a little pop-up comes up and says, you know, if you want to use the data retrieval tool, you'll be leaving this website, you'll proceed to the IRS website. Next slide. It's going to let them know, okay, you're going to be leaving the FAFSA form. It tells them many times, and if they're still on board with that, then they click proceed to the IRS. Next slide. And then a pop-up comes up again, letting them know that they are going to this government's website. They click OK. And then it has to have the student provide a little bit of information about their income tax. So some of the information will be pre-filled based on their FAFSA responses. Social Security number, for example, cannot be updated, but they will be asked to provide some additional information, such as the address. And this is where they provide the address that matches their federal income tax return for that requested year. So not necessarily their current address, but whatever address was on file when they filed their taxes. So they click submit. And then it asks again, do you really want to do this? If you do, click transfer now. If not, you can leave. Go on. And then the information will populate into their application. And this is what it'll look like. It'll say transferred from the IRS. So it won't show the number that fills in that particular box, and the student won't be able to edit it or view it. It'll just say transferred from the IRS. So then there's a series of questions. Many of the questions will say transferred for the IRS, but there will still be a few questions that the student will have to answer. One of them being, did you file an IRS Schedule K-1 form? Most students will just select no. This is only for individuals that have a legal business partnership, but for most students, they would select no. They will then get to a series of questions called the Student Simplified Path Determination. So here they're asking if the student filed what's called a Schedule 1 with their taxes. And some of your students may have actually filed a Schedule 1. They may have filed it because they received unemployment benefits, or another common one would be someone that had self-employment income, which could even include gig work, like if they were an Uber driver. And there's some other less common scenarios as well. So it asks if they filed a Schedule 1. However, if they filed a Schedule 1, but it was only to report unemployment compensation or a few other examples listed on the slide, they can still select no. Now, if they select yes, they filed a Schedule 1, or they just don't know, they'll be asked additional questions. One of them being, are they a dislocated worker? So that is someone that's laid off, they're receiving unemployment benefits, and they're unlikely to return to their previous occupation, or they lost self-employment because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Dislocated worker is also a question on the CADAA, but the CADAA does not ask about Schedule 1. So if they select no or don't know, then they'll be asked these questions on the next slide. And they're basically asking if they received any of these federal benefits. And this can be a little confusing too, because they list the name of the federal benefits, but we in California have different local names for these programs. So just for example, SNAP locally is called CalFresh, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which is listed as TANF on the slide, is known in California as CalWorks, and Medicaid is known as Medi-Cal in California. So if you're working with a student, you might need to help explain to them what these programs are called locally here in California. So they would select that. Otherwise, if they don't receive any of those benefits, they select none of the above, and they may be asked questions about assets, like how much money is in their checking and savings. But just to note in general, these questions about the student simplified path, they won't show up for all students. If they use the IRS data retrieval tool, for some students, it might simply say, transferred from the IRS. Next slide. They'll then be asked questions about additional IRS info, essentially about the amount that they received from their income tax for 2021. So it's either transferred from the IRS or the student would answer that information manually, and it gives instructions about where to find that information on their IRS form. Next slide. It then asks about additional questions for tax filers only. So, regardless of whether they use that data retrieval tool or not, they will be asked these questions. So one of the questions that it asks is if they received college grants, scholarships, or any payments from AmeriCorps from the year that they're reporting their income that were included in their taxes. And if so, they enter that information here, essentially just to make sure it doesn't count against them in their eligibility for financial aid. Some of these questions, though, as it's shown here, will automatically say transferred from the IRS. Next slide. So then there's a few additional questions as well about any child support that they may have paid. It also asks if they had earned any work from a cooperative education program. This isn't as common, but this might be a program that allows a student to apply their classroom knowledge in like a paid work experience setting, similar to work study. So that might be one scenario the student received income. Another scenario in the last question, it asks about any taxable earnings that could include federal work study. So if they did receive federal work study, they will essentially be entering it twice into the FAFSA. They would be putting it in here, and then they'd also be putting it in the prior section when asked about how much they earned from working. And by putting it in here, it's essentially subtracting it from their total amount that they earned from working, so it won't count against them when determining how much income they had. Next slide. Then I asked the student about any untaxed income. So there's a few scenarios that we did want to highlight of income that does not have to be reported on the FAFSA. So if you are working with a student who received economic impact payments like stimulus checks due to the COVID-19 pandemic, they do not have to report that on the FAFSA. Similarly, if they received any emergency financial aid grants from the pandemic from their college, they would not need to report that on the FAFSA. Students may not always know, though, if the financial aid that they received was related to that. So if they're not sure, they could just talk to their financial aid office for assistance. If they have any extended AB 12 benefits, that does not have to be reported, or CalWorks or SSI. Next slide. It asks if they want to report any other assets. They can just skip that. They don't need to. Now, if you're working with a student whose income changed since 2021, it's decreased significantly, they can always go back to the financial aid office to ask that they recalculate their financial aid award to reflect their current income. Next slide. Now, let's say they didn't file taxes. They should have filed their taxes, but they haven't yet. They would select will file. Next slide. They'll be asked similar questions, and it's going to let them know, okay, you're supposed to file taxes. Answer these questions. You can just estimate what you think you made in 2021. Your FAFSA will not be fully processed. You'll need to file your taxes, come back in, and update your application once you file your taxes. Next slide. And this just shows an example of what the questions might be. Next slide. So the most common scenario is you'll be working with students who did not file their taxes. So we'll show you how to answer those. So they would select not going to file. And just to note, a lot of our students who did not file might get a request from the IRS to verify that they did not file. That process can be complicated for a lot of students, and we do have a link here on the slide for information. So if any of your students get requested to provide verification, they can go to that website to get tips on how to navigate that process and any special considerations for students. Next slide. If you're not sure if your students should file taxes, the amount that's required every year changes. So for 2021, for our single students, it would be if they made at least $12,550. You know, for the sake of time, I won't be able to go over everything here on the slide, but there's a lot of good reasons to file taxes, a lot of tax credits that they can get, even if they made at least just $1. So even if they're not required to file taxes, they should definitely look into still filing their taxes if they made at least $1 or if they're a parent. And we have a link on the website for additional tips and resources to help students apply for their taxes. Next slide. They'll then be asked similar questions as in the first section. Of course, they won't have their tax information, but they will have to report on any income that they earned from working in 2021. And that's where they can look at their W-2 forms for this. Next slide. Similarly, they'll be asked about any additional financial info if they were in a cooperative education program or received work study. Next slide. Again, they'll be asked about any student untaxed income. And just like we talked about before, there's a list of things that do not need to be reported. However, if they did receive unemployment benefits, then they would report that here. And once again, it's okay if they like to skip questions about their assets. It is not required. Next slide. The questions on the CADAA are very similar, except there's no IRS data retrieval tool. And the only main difference is when they get to the section about indicating that they did not file taxes, they're actually not asked anything else. So it's a lot quicker and easier. Next slide. After they've completed their financial section, they're ready to sign and submit the application. So I will turn it over to Linda.
Beautiful, thank you. So we're down the home stretch. So with this, then we're looking at the submission process. And so let me make sure, yes, okay, making sure I'm on the right side. So they'll have a chance to review all the information that they've submitted one final time before submitting. So making sure to glance through that carefully if there are any changes or updates that people need to make or realize, oh, I clicked the wrong thing. This is a great way to make sure you're submitting accurate information. You can also print this page so that you have it for your records or for the students' records. And so once they do that, that's when this new optional demographic page will appear. And this is where students will have a chance to identify, again, gender, if they identify as transgender, if they're also their ethnicity and race. And so again, this is an optional one. So this does not impact students' eligibility for aid. And again, we've referenced it a couple times, but making sure students really feel comfortable or safe, especially when disclosing personal information. It is not required. So if they don't feel comfortable, they can always decline to state. Now, students will be asked, this little check mark down here is very important because that says that they're in agreement with all the requirements and statements for submitting the FAFSA, which basically said that they have submitted accurate and truthful information and to the best of their knowledge. And so once they complete that, if they click on the sign and submit form, then typically if they submitted with an FSA ID, they will not see this page. It will just say, congratulations, you've submitted. If you started this application process and you did not use like the personal information or you did not log in with your FSA ID, then you might see these options. So you have an option now to create your FSA ID, which again would exit you, but you can save all your information and exit. Or you can look at other options, and that might include like a signature page. So again, making sure students take advantage of the opportunity to create that FSA ID as they start this process so they can submit more easily. Once they do that, they'll receive a congratulations page, and well-deserved. They are looking at then additional information or insights here that are shared around 3 to 5 business days. They'll receive an email notifying that their FAFSA was processed, and other just information for them to keep again on record. They can also print this page for their record, since it also has their confirmation number and data release number. Students who complete the CADAA will also receive a confirmation page that also has their California Dream ID number. And again, students will be receiving their SAR or CalSAR within a couple of days to 2 weeks. So they'll have a chance to review that as well. And that brings us into the after the CADAA and FAFSA submission. What's next? So when we look at once that is processed within several days, we can go back in. If we log back in, we should see it, this little green mark here that says successfully processed. And at this point, this is where students can either, again, if they want to review it and check over things again, or maybe they discovered, oops, I made an error. And so I want to go back in and change it, so they can go ahead and select that option as well to make any changes as early as possible, so that again, once that information gets processed by their campus, it will not delay their financial aid award or the preparation of that award. When it comes to that student aid report or CalSAR for those who completed the CADAA, again, it's not the award letter, but it does provide an estimate. So here you'll see expected family contribution is 0. So this does not show need. It does not show what grants or anything that they'll be receiving. But again, it just gives a sense of what that expected family contribution will entail. And again, it may take up to 2 weeks to receive their student aid report, so that would typically arrive and be available via email. If you are asked, for additional verification, you can usually see that here, and then also if you can also check how much aid you have used if you're a returning student of for example, the 6-year availability. So you can look at your lifetime use as well. So for the CADAA AB 540 affidavit, this is one essential step for students who are completing the CADAA, that they do have to provide and submit a non-resident exemption request, also known as the AB 540 affidavit, which they can access from their institution where they plan to attend. So they would have to go to their Office of Admissions or look online to download that form, complete that form, and submit that. And we encourage folks to submit that form once they've been accepted to their institution, at least a semester or a quarter before they're scheduled to start classes. So if they're scheduled to start classes in the fall, ideally trying to make sure that that form gets submitted in the spring once they receive their admissions, or very early summer. And so now we've completed the FAFSA CADAA. We're not done yet. We still want to make sure students complete the CHAFE and making sure that they have access to that information, because the CHAFE provides an additional $5,000 for eligible students for up to 5 years. And that does not have to be completed consecutively. So until the age of 26, they can receive the CHAFE funding. And it can be used for private, in-state, out-of-state public institutions and private institutions, as well as career and technical institutions, both again, in-state or out-of-state. Students must have been in foster care for at least 1 day between the ages of 16 to 18 to be eligible for the CHAFE. And again, they must be enrolled half-time and have not turned 26 before the first day of the academic year, July 1st. So in applying for the CHAFE, we want folks to know it is a one-time application for first-time students. So students do not have to apply every year, and they can go to the CHAFE website to complete that application. So it is listed on a separate site. We do encourage, again, just wrap it all together in with the FAFSA CADAA application. And in the CHAFE application, they do have to identify their planned school of attendance. So to the best of their knowledge, if they're filling this out in the fall and they're saying, I really want to go to Cal State LA, then we can go ahead and list Cal State LA. And once they've made that final determination, they can go back in and and update that information. And it's really important that they do so that the proper school gets a notification. So for Chafee, we know that the surplus funds that were available to Chafee during COVID relief are no longer available. And so that means that students may, as Christina noted, she did not receive her Chafee the first year. So students may find that they are eligible, but not awarded as their status. And so that means that at this point, it's a waiting game. And so we're going to have to sit tight and see if we're awarded at some point during the academic year, towards the end of the academic year, and some students may be awarded in the early summer. So when it comes to Chafee, it's important for students to plan accordingly, and especially for first-time students, maybe not rely on Chafee funds as part of their calculations, just to be on the safe side, but to budget accordingly. So when it comes to web grants, this is again, the site that students can use to check the status of their Chafee, of their Cal Grants. And so particularly using web grants for their Cal Grant application or to check the status. So students, again, Cal Grants are available to cover tuition for CSUs and UCs and up to $9,220 for private institutions, along with an amount of about $1,650, $1,648 for non-tuition expenses. And so for students who qualify, who have dependents or who are foster youth, that amount can increase to $6,000 for non-tuition costs. So it really is important that students make sure that they are doing everything possible to access. We know only 10% of students get access to their Cal Grants. And so we really need to make sure that students are looking at submitting all the proper documentation, making sure their GPA, again, is verified. And if not, there is a verification form that they can download and submit to ensure that process. It is incumbent on the student to make sure that that is done, unfortunately. And so we want to make sure that they're aware of the steps to do that. Again, the application is extended from March 2nd to September 2nd for all students attending community college. And again, that opportunity to apply is no longer age or time limited for students attending community college, so they can apply at any time, and for students attending four-year institutions before the age of 26. So they can maintain their Cal Grant for up to 8 years. And again, can apply up to age 26 if attending a four-year institution. So for the California DREAM Act, this is a new opportunity for funding where we can encourage our CADAA eligible students who meet Cal Grant B eligibility to really look at the option that they have if they want to perform community service and have an option to receive up to $4,500 per academic year, and it's renewable for up to 8 semesters or 12 quarters. So again, students must maintain the eligibility, which includes SAP and a minimum GPA of 2.0. They have to apply annually, and again, that more application is available on the CSAC page. So when we're looking at web grants, again, My Grant Info is the site where students can go. They will want to make sure and wait maybe 1 to 2 weeks for their FAFSA to process in order to then see what is being listed on their web grant site. But again, it's important to make sure that they start checking that on a regular basis. And so in that, they'll have a chance to upgrade or update, I should say, their demographic information, their home and contact information. So if anything changes, it is essential that students make sure that this information is updated on a regular basis so that they can get connected with CSAC as needed. There's also a chance for them to check under their Cal Grant, under their Chafee, their status. So if students are asking you, what's happening to my Chafee? This is where they need to go. So they can see if they've been awarded, if it's pending, or if they've not awarded. And they have a chance to identify, is there a reason why? They can check out the reason, or if there's a to-do that is pending. So in this instance, for example, for Chafee, they're looking at the fact that their status for DPSS or Department of Social Services record is incomplete. And so there is a certification form that needs to be completed. So they can click on this link and complete that form as needed to make sure that all of their documents are ready to go. So again, web grants to do is making sure award status and amounts for Chafee and for Cal Grant. that anything that is pending needs to be completed in a timely fashion, making sure all of their school of attendance information is accurate. If students do change schools between one academic year to the next, making sure to update that information. Verifying GPA verification has been completed and submitted and matched with the student's account. Again, they have to self-verify their graduation. So that's after they graduate from high school, they will be available to verify that status. And again, making sure that their Department of Social Services records are completed and their status is cleared for their Chafee grant. So with SAP, we're looking at, as Christina mentioned too, making sure students are aware of satisfactory academic progress, which is really based off of 3 core areas, making sure that they're passing the classes that they're taking along the way, that they're maintaining standard GPA of 2.0 or higher, and that they're completing within a reasonable time. And so for students to really understand so that they're not losing their financial aid eligibility over their time while they're in school. When it comes to, again, understanding and helping students understand STAP, it's best to really give them an insight as to how it works, but also connecting them to academic counselors and advising students to talk to a counselor, not only in terms of setting their schedule, but also before dropping or withdrawing from any classes, making sure they understand and can get support if they do receive SAP status, to then be able to appeal that process and understand the steps to successfully appeal, and really encouraging, again, students to be proactive rather than reactive. So it's really important to do that. So we're all set and we've completed this. Now, the only thing is we want to make sure to connect people to different resources. So there are the free help completing this FAFSA. We want to definitely emphasize the CADAA lines as well for folks to get access. And when it comes to the California College Pathways portal, where they can find additional benefits and planning, we do want to stress there are some new resources for JBay. And so there's a scholarship resources for current and former foster youth, which are available on our website. The link is provided above. And then again, the new updated high school counselor and toolkit with the IRS verification for non-filing guidance. So please make sure to reference these sort of resources as you're looking for additional information. So if you want to practice, there's a demo site. And so we encourage folks to check that site out as well. And we are done on time. So we thank you so much for, sorry for the last minute race through that material, but we know you'll have opportunity to review that at your leisure or to rewatch the recording, as well as access the slides. And all of those links, again, will be live in the PDF. So thank you again so much for joining us. We thank you for all the work you're doing to support students in completing this process. And remember, 70% for this upcoming FAFSA challenge. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll hopefully see you soon.